Lately, we've been talking quite a bit about traumatic bonding, family relationships, and encounters with sociopaths and psychopaths within the family. In today's video, I want to talk about the consequences of traumatic bonding. I'll go ahead and redefine traumatic bonding for you as well, but the highlights of this video is going to be the consequences that you are likely to face if you have been in a traumatic bond with somebody who's close to you. Let's jump in. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming back to my channel, for sending me emails, for contacting me, for sending me tweets, and for posting in the comment section below and all the other things that you guys do. Thank you so much for that. And for those who are new to this channel, I encourage you to first hit that subscribe button, then go back through the channel and look at some of the previous videos that I've done on this topic. I'm sure you will find them helpful. And in case you don't know who I am, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Tamara, and I'm an internationally and board certified trauma therapist, but I'm also licensed in mental health. And I specialize within my practice in treating children, teens, and families, as well as adults who are dealing with trauma. Let's go ahead and jump in. Anytime I talk about traumatic bonding, it's usually at a conference or in a family session or some kind of a community center or meeting where I have to highlight the consequences of being in a traumatic bond with somebody who is close to you. You know, traumatic bonding is something we don't hear a lot of. It tends to be more of a topic that is centralized in the discussions focused on child abuse and sexual assault and child neglect and child abandonment. But we can also talk about traumatic bonding as being a symptom of an enmeshed family, an unhealthy family, a dysfunctional family, and a family, who tends to kind of keep everything on the down low, for lack of a clinical term, a family who kind of keeps things hidden. Those kinds of families are really difficult to understand because everything is kind of sealed in a vault. You can't just knock on the door and somebody opens it. You've got to get a key and a saw and a lantern and whatever else to get through that door and really search for what's wrong. And that's kind of what I go through as a therapist in treating these particular families. So I think in today's video, I just want to highlight the consequences of coming out of a situation like that if you are a victim of traumatic bonding. So let's just go ahead and jump into this video, okay? So the first thing that you're likely to see if you've been in a traumatic bond with someone is I don't know how to put this, kind of like an inability to recall traumatic aspects of the relationship. So forgetfulness, I should say, and loss of memories. Now I talk about that right up here in this video if you want to go back and check that out. If you want to kind of get some understanding of traumatic memories. But what's likely to happen is in a situation where there's traumatic bonding, right? Let's say you're traumatically bonded to your parent. We'll just say your father for the sake of this video. And, your father has been this very charismatic, loving, emotionally attached kind of a dad. He's involved in everything that you do, And, at this point, you just love your dad. You see nothing but stars and nothing but bright lights when you look at your dad. The sad part is when your dad drinks or when they do drugs, there's a different dad there. And that different dad becomes abusive and aggressive and overwhelming to you. He may even sexually abuse you. There may be some emotional incest, which I talk about right up here in this video. There may also be elements of manipulation and enmeshment, meaning, here's the definition of enmeshment right here, meaning that the relationship is overly emotional, that father is overly involved with you, almost to a point of really crossing appropriate parental boundaries. So this is your dad, right? You don't like the bad part of him. So what do? You abandon that view of your dad. You cling to the good sides of your dad. And even though he continues to abuse you in patterns over time, you find some way to minimize the issue. Now you're an adult, right? After years of being a part of this kind of relationship, and you find that you can't recall any of your childhood. Right? You have forgotten bits and pieces of the trauma. You can't really remember what your dad did to you that's so bad. It's really difficult for you to figure out what kind of dad do I have. And did the trauma I thought I experienced really happen? So this is something that can happen, right? You can begin to forget that the trauma actually happened. And it's not that you are denying it. It's that bits and pieces of your brain, particularly the emotional centers of the brain, like the limbic system, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, and the thalamus. Here's a picture of the brain right here so that you can see those different components. And I talk a lot about this on my channel, so go back through and look at some of those videos on brain development and neuroscience and neurology. But it's not like you're trying to forget. It's that your brain has the inability to remember, right? It's too traumatic. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is you either deny or you minimize that the abuse has happened, right? Traumatic bonding is something that's really complex because you are trying to manage a relationship in an objective way. And it's really difficult to do that when you have been abused, right? So you have a good side of the person and you have the bad side of the person. And it's really hard for you to marry those two people because they're so opposite. So you abandon the bad part and cling to the good. But while you're clinging to the good, you're still being abused. And you can't seem to unravel yourself from that abusive image that you're so desperately trying to minimize or deny, right? So what happens? You become an adult and you want that loving image that you thought you had in a parent, and you begin to deny and minimize that the abuse ever happened in the first place. It's almost like you force yourself to lie and see things in a way that you shouldn't see them. The third thing is that you either hide, right, or completely disregard your emotions. And you do this in an attempt to, again, minimize or deny that the abuse ever occurred. You can't necessarily deny that the abuse occurred, but you can deny your own emotions about it. And you could try to alter in your mind different ways that you think about that trauma, right? My dad was doing a lot of alcohol at the time, but he only does that when he's drunk, right? There's an excuse, right? There's denial. Another thing that you might say is something like, well, he was young and became a parent so quickly that he didn't know what he was doing. But even though he sexually molested me for years, he's a better dad now, right? You may hear those kind of things from people who are really trying to hide and deny their emotions. You can't necessarily deny that the trauma occurred because it's very clear that it occurred, but you can try to deny how you think about it and how you feel about it. The next thing is that you over-identify with the abuser, and it's almost a codependence, or an enmeshment, or some kind of alliance, which I talk about right here in the first video I did on traumatic bonding. You basically say, you know what, if I were him, I would do A, B, and C. Or if I had the kind of childhood that he had, I would do A, B, and C, right? So you over-identify with the abuser so much that you can't detach from the idea that the abuse is bad, right? Because again, you're minimizing it, you're denying it, you're hiding it. So make it small, make it non-existent, and then you can kind of, live with the idea that you have been traumatized by this person. It's like reverse psychology on your mind. You're trying to make this better. You're trying to make this easier. Traumatic bonding is pretty difficult, and it includes a variety of stages that the individual goes through. But one important stage, that you are likely to go through is stage number 1 of traumatic bonding, which is it's like this intense emotional attachment that begins to happen between you and that parent or you and that family member. It's built as a result of intermittent reinforcement, okay? It's built as a result of intermittent reinforcement. What I mean by that is the individual intermittently is nice and bad, right? Good and evil, and that back and forth in an intermittent sense, right, creates this confused perception of the person in you. And so that bond, that intense emotional attachment is built by that intermittent reinforcement. And that intermittent reinforcement may include love and praise and compassion, but it may also include hatred, anger, abuse, and neglect, right? And all of that occurs in an intermittent sense, and it makes it really difficult for you to identify that you're being abused because it's so intermittent, it's so sporadic, you can't keep up. The next thing that happens in a trauma bond or a traumatic situation with somebody that you are attached to or close with is that you're likely to see repeated patterns of abuse, harm, and disregard. mixed with no accountability and apologies, right? So you're going to have a series or a barrage of apologies, but there's never any accountability. And it's mixed with abuse, harm, or disregard. Traumatic bonding is usually the result of no accountability on the part of the abused, right? Tons of apologies and a barrage of promises that end up getting broken. And it includes a series of events where you are clearly disregarded, harmed, or abused. Okay, so this is stage number 2. You're likely to deal with this if you are traumatically bonded with a family member or someone that you were attached to. And lastly, okay, this is something else I've seen in terms of traumatic bonding within my office, or in books and kind of communicating with my colleagues about their cases. The third stage that you're likely to enter is that stage of intense denial, and possibly a series of stages of grief, right? Because now you're coming into the realization that you are now an abused individual. But again, because it's intermittent, it's really hard to pinpoint that you're being abused. So you just kind of accept where you are until things become more clear, and you either begin to make excuses or you begin to kick into survival mode and you placate that abusive person until you can get out. Unfortunately, children can't do this. Now, adolescents and adults can, but children are stuck in that. And so the further along that child goes in that traumatic bond or in that relationship, they become almost even more traumatized, and post-traumatic stress disorder and acute stress disorder is likely to occur, and adjustment disorder and a bunch of other diagnoses as well. In the case of an adult who is in a traumatic bond with a parent or family member, you're likely to go through a series of stages of grief, that denial stage, that depression stage, that anger stage, that bargaining stage. And then eventually, as you begin to uncover that person and as you begin to accept that you're in a trauma bond, then you can begin to accept what is going on. But it takes a lot of steps, a lot of patience, and a lot of strength and courage to get to that stage of acceptance, or what we call that stage of post-traumatic growth. And I talk about post-traumatic growth right up here in this video if you want to check it out. So we'll come back, guys, because I'm going to be talking about this again. This is a pretty complex topic, and we can do a whole series, every single day on this topic. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to various components of this topic, but I'm going to post in the description box below a couple videos that I've done on the past in terms of traumatic bonding. Thank you so much for being with me today, guys. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and that thumbs up button if you want to stick around with us, and I will see you in the next video. Take good care of yourself.